I got fired 10 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. Not laid off. Not, we'll circle back next week. Fired. In a crisp navy suit I'd spent 3 months paying off, standing in a hotel hallway that smelled like fresh lilies and expensive perfume, with my phone still warm in my hand. "Consider it my gift to you," he'd said. And then he hung up. Yeah. That didn't sit right. I stared at the screen for a second longer than necessary, like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something less absurd. They didn't. Down the hall, I could hear my fiancée's bridesmaids laughing, the kind of laughter that floats, light and unaware. I slipped the phone into my pocket, adjusted my cufflinks, and smiled. Because that's what I'd gotten very good at. Smiling through it. I should rewind a little. My name's Caleb Foster. I'd spent 6 years working at Halston & Reed, a mid-sized consulting firm that liked to pretend it was bigger than it was. I wasn't flashy, not the guy cracking jokes in meetings or pitching ideas like fireworks. I listened. I paid attention. I remembered things people didn't realize they'd said out loud. That alone had gotten me further than most. The problem wasn't the work. It was who I worked under. Trevor Langston. Son of the founder. Late 20s. Expensive watch, louder opinions, and that particular confidence that comes from never having to earn it. He had this way of talking to people, half smile, eyes already somewhere else, that made it clear you were just passing time. To him, I was background noise. At first, it was small stuff. He'd interrupt me mid-sentence in meetings, finish my point like it was his idea. Or he'd forget to CC me on emails that involved my own projects. Once, he presented a proposal I'd built from scratch, didn't even bother changing the formatting. Just stood there, hands in his pockets, like he'd pulled it out of thin air. I nodded like, sure, whatever. Because I knew how this worked. You don't win by reacting. You win by watching. The worst part wasn't the credit. It was the tone. "You're solid, Caleb," he'd say, clapping me on the shoulder like we were teammates. Just, not leadership material, you know? Always delivered casually. Like he was doing me a favor. I'd smile. Got it. What I didn't say was that I was already doing his job half the time. But again, patience. There was a pattern to Trevor. He liked control. Not real control, the kind built on understanding, but the visible kind. Titles. Perception. Being the guy people looked at when decisions were made. And he had a weakness. He didn't think consequences applied to him. I started noticing it about a year before my wedding. A vendor contract he approved without reading the fine print. A client he overpromised just to sound impressive. Little cracks. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to make you pause. Except he never paused. I kept records. Not because I was planning anything dramatic. Just habit. Notes. Email threads. Versions of documents. The kind of quiet archive you build when you've been underestimated long enough to know it might matter someday. Then came the Marlowe account. Biggest client the firm had ever landed. Corporate restructuring, high stakes, a lot of moving parts. Trevor wanted it. Of course he did. It was the kind of win you could build a reputation on. He pulled me into his office. "Caleb, you're gonna handle the back end on this," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I'll deal with the client-facing stuff. Translation, do the work, stay invisible." "Sounds good," I said. And it did. Because I knew something he didn't. Marlowe's CFO was meticulous. The kind of guy who asked questions twice just to see if your answers changed. He didn't care about charm. He cared about details. Details Trevor tended to overlook. So I made sure everything was airtight. Every projection, every clause, every assumption documented and cross-checked. And I kept copies. Clean, time-stamped, impossible to dispute. Not for revenge. Just in case. Around that time, my life outside work was finally settling into something steady. Hannah and I had been together 4 years. She was the kind of person who saw through noise, who could look at me after a long day and just say, "You're holding something in." She wasn't wrong. One night, a few weeks before the wedding, we were sitting on the balcony of our apartment. City lights, quiet traffic, that low hum that makes you feel like everything's still moving even when you stop. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Sometimes," I said. "What's stopping you?" I shrugged. "Timing." She studied me for a second. "Or pride?" I smiled. "Probably both." She didn't push. She never did. Just leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "Whatever happens, don't let someone else decide your worth for you." I remember that line. Because it came back later. The week of the wedding, things got tense. Marlowe had flagged inconsistencies in a projection Trevor had personally approved. Not massive, but enough to raise eyebrows. He brushed it off in the meeting. "Minor adjustment," he said, waving a hand. "We'll refine the numbers." The CFO didn't smile. Afterward, Trevor cornered me. "You double-checked those figures, right?" he asked. "I sent you the finalized version last Thursday," I said. He frowned, like he was trying to remember something he hadn't paid attention to. "Yeah, well, just make sure there's nothing else," he said, tone sharper now. "Already did." He nodded, but there was a flicker of something in his expression. Not concern. More like annoyance that the situation existed at all. That's when I knew. This was going to get messy. Still, I didn't expect the timing. My wedding day. Late morning. I was in the hotel suite, adjusting my tie, trying to keep my hands steady. Nerves, sure, but the good kind. The kind that comes with knowing you're about to step into something real. My phone buzzed. Trevor. I almost didn't answer. "Hey," I said. "Yeah, Caleb," he replied, voice clipped. "We need to make a call." I glanced at the mirror. Now? Now. There was a pause. Then, like he was reading off a script he barely believed in. "We're terminating your position. Effective immediately." I blinked. "On what grounds?" "Performance misalignment," he said. "It's just not working out." I let that sit for a second. "Today?" I asked. He chuckled. Actually chuckled. "Consider it my gift to you. Clean slate. Go enjoy your day." Click. I stood there, phone in hand, listening to the silence that followed. And for a brief moment, just a moment, I felt it. That old, familiar sting. The one that comes from being dismissed like you don't matter. Then it passed. Because something else took its place. Clarity. I walked back into the suite. My best man, Cole, looked up. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just work stuff." He raised an eyebrow. "On your wedding day?" I smiled. Timing's never been their strong suit. I didn't explain further. There was no need. The ceremony went on. Hannah walked down the aisle, and for a while, everything else just faded. We said our vows. Simple, honest. No theatrics. And when it was over, when we stepped out into the late afternoon light, I felt something settle inside me. Not relief. Resolve. The reception was in full swing when my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I stepped outside, away from the music and chatter, into the cool evening air. "Caleb Foster," I answered. Caleb, this is Richard Langston. Trevor's father. Founder of the firm. I straightened slightly. Good evening, Mr. Langston. I understand today is your wedding day, he said. So I'll keep this brief. First, congratulations. Thank you. A pause. Then. I've just been informed of a decision made regarding your employment. I didn't say anything. Was that decision communicated to you today? Yes, sir. By Trevor? Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. I see, he said quietly. Caleb, I'd like to ask you a question, and I need an honest answer. Of course. Is there anything I should know about the Marlowe account? I leaned against the railing, looking out at the city. Everything relevant is documented, I said. Including version histories and approvals. He exhaled, slow. Would you be willing to share those records with me? I can, I said. But I'd prefer to do it formally. Understood, he replied. Come in tomorrow. Noon. My office. I smiled, just slightly. Tomorrow's our honeymoon, I said. But I can be there the day after. Another pause. Then, almost, approval. That's fine, he said. Enjoy your wedding, Caleb. When I walked back inside, Hannah caught my expression immediately. That wasn't just work stuff, she said. I shook my head. No. It wasn't. She took my hand. You okay? Yeah, I said. Actually, yeah. 2 days later, I sat across from Richard Langston in a glass-walled office that felt a lot quieter than it used to. Trevor was there too. Standing by the window, arms crossed, trying to look in control. He didn't look at me. Richard gestured to the chair. Please. I sat, placed a folder on the table. Clean. Organized. Months of quiet observation distilled into something simple. I've reviewed some preliminary information, Richard said. But I'd like to hear it from you. So I walked him through it. Calm. Precise. No accusations, just facts. Timelines. Emails. Approvals. The exact moment decisions were made and who made them. Trevor shifted halfway through. This is blown out of proportion, he cut in. We're talking about minor discrepancies. I glanced at him, then back at Richard. The discrepancies were flagged by the client, I said. Not internally. Richard's gaze didn't move from the documents. And the termination? He asked. Trevor spoke before I could. Performance issue. He wasn't. On his wedding day? Richard interrupted, finally looking up. Silence. Trevor swallowed. It was timing. Richard closed the folder slowly. Timing, he repeated. There was something in his tone now. Not anger. Something colder. Trevor, step outside. Trevor hesitated. Dad. Now. The door closed behind him. Richard leaned back, studying me. Caleb, he said, I built this company on trust. Not just with clients, but internally. What you've shown me suggests a breakdown of that trust. I nodded. I understand. He was quiet for a moment. Your position, he said finally, was terminated improperly. That will be corrected. Effective immediately. I didn't react. Just listened. I'd also like to offer you a role leading the Marlowe account moving forward, he continued. Directly reporting to me. There it was. The moment people think you wait for. The win. But it didn't feel like a victory lap. It felt measured. I appreciate that, I said. But I'm going to decline. He raised an eyebrow. May I ask why? I thought about Hannah. About that balcony. About the way she'd said don't let someone else decide your worth. I think it's time for a clean slate, I said. On my terms. Richard nodded slowly. Fair enough. He stood, extended his hand. Then let me at least say this, you handled this with more professionalism than most would have. I shook his hand. Thank you. As I left the office, Trevor was still in the hallway. He looked at me, like he was trying to figure out how the room had shifted without him noticing. I gave him a small nod. Not smug. Not angry. Just, done. A few months later, I started my own consultancy. Smaller scale, different approach. Clients who valued the work, not just the presentation. Marlowe reached out eventually. Turns out, they preferred working with the guy who actually knew what he was doing. Funny how that works. And every now and then, I think back to that hallway on my wedding day. The call. The words. Consider it my gift to you. I guess, in a way, it was. Because some gifts don't look like much when you first open them. But they change everything once you understand what they really are.